thank you, Philip, and morning, Algeta. In addition to acknowledging the traditional custodians of land we meet on, the Gadigal people and their elders past, present and emerging, I'd also like to acknowledge everybody in the room who's come down from Papua New Guinea or elsewhere in the world. It's great to see so many friends, colleagues down here in Sydney, which is in my home country, originally hometown of my parents. I'd also like to particularly acknowledge the PNG landowners, government and all my co-workers from both industry and the regulator. It's great to be here. And it's fascinating for me as well because of the panellists, except for Brett who just gave that excellent talk before, all of them are former colleagues of mine. I've worked closely with all of those people. So it's a small world, Papua New Guinea, and that's one of the lovely things about having the privilege to work in PNG. I'd also like to acknowledge the PNG Chamber of Resources and Energy. I've done work with that group for many years and helped organise conferences in the past, but I've never seen a conference quite as well organised and as professional as this one. So I think a big hand for the workers in the Chamber of Resources and Energy. Now, my talk's going to be in two parts really. The first part, I'm just going to give a general talk about some of my views on exploration in PNG, and it's not really particularly technical. It's really, the front part of it is really just to talk to some of the challenges we have as explorationists. This conference has been fascinating because I think we've seen a real turn in the sentiment towards the resource sector and also more encouragement for exploration from the Prime Minister, from the Petroleum Minister and from many of the other speakers. So I think we're on the cusp of not only a development boom, but potentially an exploration boom in this country, and that's what I want to talk about. And the back half of my talk is going to be giving you some detail on what Larus Energy is doing, which, like the talk we just heard from Brent, is actually another one of these new basin opener type of opportunities with huge potential. I'm talking about a large emerging play in the Gulf of Papua. But first, to put this picture up, sometimes I think we forget, we see New Guinea at the top of Australia as a sort of small piece of land, but if you drop that map on the same scale as Europe, it's a bloody big country. And I mean, we forget that. And also in New Guinea, there's a lot of sedimentary basins, and it was great coming after the last talk, which is up in the New Island Basin effectively. That's an unexplored basin. The Papuan Basin we all know is explored, but there's still other basins in the country. And even within the Papuan Basin, it is a really relatively unexplored basin. These two maps, one shows the Carnarvon Basin, which is one of the premier basins in Australia, and the other is the Papuan Basin. They're about the same size. But if you look at the number of exploration wells that have been drilled, there's only 20% of the number of exploration wells drilled in the Papuan Basin as there is in the Carnarvon Basin. So by any estimate, that would suggest that it's a relatively unexplored basin. And there's obviously reasons for that. It's hard to access, and it's it's been a difficult exploration destination, but a large amount has been found. And if you look down to the southeast part of the Papuan Basin, in that little yellow blob, which is PPL 579, that's the Larus Energy block, which I'll be talking about a bit later. There isn't a single well in that part of the basin, which is extraordinary when you think about it. So the USGS, that's United States Geological Survey, they do these regional studies all around the world just to try and work out remaining potential in various basins and countries. And they actually estimate that there's 10 billion barrels of oil equivalent yet to find in the Papuan Basin. And now they're only looking at the existing established play types in the Papuan Basin. They're not looking at the other basins, and they're not looking at new play types. To put that in perspective, so far we've found 6 billion barrels of oil equivalent with all of the discoveries to date in the Papuan Basin. So what the USGS is telling us is there's actually more to find yet in the Papuan Basin than we have found, and a lot of that, what we found, is not yet developed. And they haven't even begun to look at the other basins in Papua New Guinea or new plays within the Papuan Basin. Taking it from another look, why is this so? This slide, the graph here, what I'm trying to show is the national budget that Papua New Guinea has per head of population, and it is one of the lowest in the world. On the right-hand side of that chart there you can see Australia and US, and I've really just taken the federal government budgets that they release each year to support their work programs from the nation. I haven't actually included state budgets in Australia and America. It's just the federal budgets. And you can just see Papua New Guinea doesn't have a lot of money to spend as a nation. And this is one of the big challenges with Papua New Guinea, because your state-owned enterprises aren't really well financed. You can't use a lot of state money to explore within your own country. And that leads to the paradigm that we have in Papua New Guinea, whether people like it or not, that the only way that you're going to get exploration happening, I think, is through large investment, likely from outside. We know PNG is a nation really rich in resources. So as this paradigm, we've got a really resource-rich nation here, but a very capital-poor nation. So we've got to get together to have the investment coming from probably overseas to try and develop the resources in a way that works. And so the challenge is really, how do we cut in pig? Which is mainly, how do you chop the pig up? How do you divide the pie, maybe in Australia, but in Papua New Guinea, is how do you cut the pig? And there's a lot of different stakeholders in PNG that need to be satisfied, like there is anywhere. But we've got the investors. We obviously need to invest and make money, but you've got landowners, you've got provincial governments, national governments, citizens, environment. You've got a lot of things that need to be looked after in PNG in order to be able to get a development or even an exploration project up. And it's a complicated place to get that balance right, as we've seen with how the projects have struggled to get themselves across the line. But PNG is actually quite blessed. It's got a very simple fiscal system for resources, and it's one that I think is amazing. And I go around the world talking about what a great system it is, because it's really a simple royalty tax system. And if you allow me just to quickly take you through the left-hand side of it, you have your production of resource, you have a royalty. This is very common. You get your production net of royalties, which is your sales revenue. Your revenue minus your costs is your profits. You pay tax on that. The joint venture makes a profit, and some of that profit goes to the investors. Because in this case, unlike most cases in the world, the joint venture isn't just the investors from overseas, it's also the state company and the landowner company. So in the middle column there, you can see the state take. The royalties get split between landowners, provincial governments, and national governments. When you're doing your operations, a lot of the services are produced by landowner companies, so you're getting quite a lot of take to the landowners through that. You're getting government tax through normal tax and also through additional profits tax if a project has got a greater than 15% rate of return. And then at the bottom part there, you get the landowners and the government, Kumul Petroleum and MRDC normally, take some equity profit, and then the investors take their profit as well. The system's actually really, really good, and it's one that gives multiple sources of revenue out to multiple people in PNG. And I've never seen that anywhere in the world, and I've spent my career across South America, Southeast Asia, and Australia. So I think it's great, but the issue that we've obviously had in PNG is that the government needs to fund its equity position in these projects, and that's caused a whole lot of issues. So I think as an industry, I think we're getting to the space now where we understand we've got to actually work with the government to try and make that work a little bit better, and that's, I think, where the cusp of the debate is at the moment. We can't have the government diverting their scarce capital that we've just mentioned before into big resource projects that might still have some risk. We've got to try and work with them in a mechanism that allows that government funding to be a bit more palatable. Anyway, that's enough of that. I'm a geologist and I want to talk geology for a little bit now. So petroleum plays in Papua New Guinea. The top three there I've got, foreland clastics, fold belt inversion and tertiary carbonate, are really the three established plays in Papua New Guinea. So that sort of dark green strip up at the top there of the map is the fold belt. So that really takes in the sort of part of the Western Province, Hela Province and Southern Highlands. And that's where all of the discoveries that are producing are from. There's no production at the moment in Papua New Guinea from anything else but that one play. The tertiary carbonate play, which is largely in Gulf Province and offshore, that's where elk antelope sits. And that's a play that will be commercialised, we hope, and there's been lots of encouraging signs at this conference that will be commercialised in the coming time. And there's a lot of discoveries in the foreland, which is that large area of the Western Province there, but are still stranded. And it was great hearing Kumul Petroleum talking a little bit about that earlier in this session, of their plans to try and commercialise that, because we haven't yet commercialised anything. But when you come down to that southeast part, and of course this is what I'm here to talk about, which is the Larus energy piece at PPL 579, We think there's a fantastic giant Miocene clastic play there, and we've got a series of giant prospects, the largest Nanamoropi, which we'll be talking about shortly. And then Total, as people are aware, have got the giant Melu prospect, which is a large carbonate build-up, a limestone build-up, old reef, probably of Eocene age, sitting on a basement high. So we've got two really giant new play types there, and I'm not going to sell Total's prospect for them, they should do that themselves, but this is really more about the Larus thing. So these are just a cartoon of what these different play types look like. I think I presented this years ago at one of these conferences, just trying to get people's head around what the different plays and potentials are. But what we're talking about at Larus on the bottom right there is a toe thrust fold belt in deep water, only about 30 kilometres off the south coast of Papua New Guinea and only about 60 to 100 kilometres from Port Moresby. I'll show you a bit more about how this all works with those big three plays. So this is the 6 billion barrels of oil equivalent that's been found since around about 1950. You see the big step up there with Hides, which is the big thing that has been found in PNG. A number of other discoveries, more recently the elk antelope discovery, and then Pinyang and of course Muruk in the latest large discovery really made in PNG. But if you look at that by play, the green is the component that comes from that fold belt. The pink, which has really got that large step up at elk antelope, is the carbonate play in the Gulf province, and then you can see quite a small amount which has come from the Western province, largely in the foreland features. Now, if you look at that against wells drilled, you can see it's quite the red line's how many wells drilled per year. And you can see it's quite spiky, but interestingly, in that period in the 1980s to 90s, there was a huge amount of activity in Papua New Guinea. And that was actually because the government and industry at the time got together and decided what the fiscal regime would be if you had an oil discovery. It's really, really hard to explore in a country and put risk capital out if you don't know what you're going to have as a fiscal regime when you come to develop it. So that actually enabled a huge amount of exploration. It really opened up Papua New Guinea for the oil project and subsequently the LNG project. Also, quite sadly, you can see since around 2010, there's been a complete falling off of exploration in PNG to virtually no wells being drilled in terms of exploration. It was encouraging to hear Santos drilling a couple of near-field exploration wells in Ziggy's talk. But really, this wildcat exploration has really stopped, and I think it's really stopped due to the uncertainty that has come upon us with what are the fiscal frameworks going to be when you come to develop things. But I would hope that if we can get these other two plays working and we can get some good agreements of government on how things are going to work, we've got a lot of growth to happen, not only in the Papuan Basin, but in the other basins in Papua New Guinea. And so to address some of that, this is the Larus piece of the talk. There's our permit down in the southeast of Papuan Basin. Not really far from Port Moresby, so logistically quite easy to access, good port facilities, offshore from Kupiano. A really interesting oil seep just to the north of the block, which has a very sort of late Cretaceous, possible early tertiary fingerprinted oil there, which is different to the Mesozoic oils back in the highlands. And we believe there's a new petroleum system there. And I'll talk a bit about the seismic data, but as Boyo mentioned, the spec seismic that's been acquired in the Gulf has really allowed people to open up some of these new plays that we're seeing here. Complicated geological cartoon. I guess I was sceptical of this part of the Papuan Basin. I always thought it would be oceanic crust out here and normal petroleum wisdom, although we saw in the previous talk, maybe we're wrong, is that oceanic crust is not a good place to find hydrocarbon accumulations. But it does seem we've got a proper big Mesozoic section underlying this fold belt of Miocene age. It's very complicated as you get onshore with a lot of complicated, not only depositional environments, but a lot of cross-cutting faulting. But when you get out to that toe thrust, which we've got in the square there, the rectangle, the green rectangle, we've got a really interesting thrust belt, toe thrust belt, of 3 or 4 big fault bend fold anticlines, which are shown on the seismic, which are really well imaged. This is some of the 2D seismic that Searcher had acquired. And these were sort of tantalizingly interesting. So the Larus team built up this sort of geological model. We did a lot of basin modelling as well to come up with a story. We actually believe we're oil prone underneath the prospects we're looking at here. And we mapped out these structures, which are about 60 to 80 kilometres long, 10, 20 kilometres wide. So on the comparison on the previous talk, they're probably twice the size of Hydes in terms of footprint, which are really quite interesting in terms of what volumes they could hold. A series of prospects quite close together and a whole lot of different plays. We've also got the same carbonate play in the block that Total is drilling, but we actually find these plays a little bit more interesting perhaps. Each of these prospects is potentially a multi-billion barrel field if it had hydrocarbons in it, and that's the big unknown. You've got to put a hole down there sometime. But before we wanted to put the hole down, we reprocessed some of the seismic. We found that on every anticline, the amplitude of where we see the turbidite reservoirs in these things dims right at the point where we have the spill point, which was our P10 in terms of our volumetric. Our P50 is much smaller than that, our mid case. So we're seeing at the spill point of every prospect an amplitude change, which we think is suggesting a move from a light oil to a water contact. And you can see a little cartoon there just showing what the prospects look like. So this got exciting to us, so we thought, well, let's go and shoot seismic and raise some money for that. Larus is a pretty small company. We don't have a lot of money. In fact, half of the Larus team is in this room, and that's 4 of us. So we're a very small company. But we decided that rather than sort of running around Australia hitting up people, let's raise money in Port Moresby. And actually, we raised the capital for a big 3D seismic survey largely in Port Moresby from high net worth individuals and other groups to acquire this data and get a part of the PNG private sector involved in this project earlier this year. And we've acquired the survey and we've started processing it, obviously, and we've actually got our first volumes just came in about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So and the data is incredibly high resolution. We can see a lot more detail than we could on the 2D. The structures have been confirmed, the same sort of size that we had mapped on the 2D, but with a lot more detail. So big hats off to Searcher. We pre-funded this survey. It's a multi-client survey, but Searcher has the data available for sale, and they have a booth here if you want to go and have a close look at it. We're still the final processing is still a couple of months away, but we've certainly got enough out of what we can see already to be very confident we're onto something very interesting here. This is just a quick snapshot of a couple of pieces. The top on the right just shows you the sort of resolution that we've got on the seismic. And this is one of the prospects here, but these sort of brighter levels are the sort of reservoir. These are massive turbidite flows that are a couple of 100 metres thick. We believe very high sand quality. And when you're doing an amplitude extraction on this one here, it's one of the 2 reservoir sections in that prospect, so that's a cross section, this one up here through the earth, and this one's a map. It's actually a horizontal, well, sort of horizontal section. It's just really following that reflector there and looking at the amplitudes of the seismic. And so for those who aren't geophysicists in here, yellow and green and red mean really good, probably a lot of sand, and blue means might be shale or non-sandy. We've got a large cutout here, which is a big scour where part of the slope has collapsed, which is actually a bit of a lateral seal for the prospect. One of our big prospects is here, and the second one back is in here. And the interesting thing we've got, not only have we got these massive turbidite flows, which usually make excellent reservoir, but we've got these textures here that almost look like dune fields, which we believe are large contorite deposits. Now, when I was really doing geology, turbidites were all the rage, but actually reworked turbidites, which are called contorites, which is where bottom currents of winnowed sands out, make even better reservoirs, apparently. And so it's been interesting looking for analogues elsewhere, and I'll show on the next slide Mozambique, which is the famous place for large-scale contorites in a minute. But before I go there, the bottom left picture down here, the leading fault here has been breached by a mass transport complex, and it's leaked what looks like some form of hydrocarbon, gas or oil, up to the surface. And there's a crater that we can image on the seabed map that's over 1 kilometre in diameter, where we've had a massive gas escape feature happen out of the leading part of this fold belt. We've got quite a lot of other DHIs that we're seeing on the direct hydrocarbon indicators that we're seeing on the 3D seismic. And so we're fairly confident now we've got charge. We're very, very confident we've got reservoir. We can see seal and we can see structure. So we've got all the makings of what could be a giant new petroleum system that could even dwarf what we've got onshore in the highlands of PNG. And it's only about 100 kilometres from Port Moresby and 30 kilometres from the coast. So to put that in perspective, the top left picture here is just a strike line through our area. Everything's on the same sort of scale here, so that's a 25 kilometre scale bar. This picture down here is the coral and mamba systems in Mozambique. So this is where there's over 80 TCF you're looking at in cross-section in this slide. It's a giant discovery in East Africa. Very similar turbidite systems with these large contorite flows as well. So it's certainly a great analogue for what we've got here. This one here is just our block superimposed on offshore Sabah. So our block's almost 10,000 square kilometres. So it's a large piece of acreage. So you can see most of offshore Sabah, which is a very large petroleum province, would fit within our block. But also other deep water analogues around West Africa I've just shown there. In terms of scale, this thing is world scale. Qualifier if it works. And we don't know until we drill a well. So what we're going to do, 2023 has been a great year for us. We started with nothing except an idea, raised some money, acquired a 3D seismic survey. We're the most active exploration company in Papua New Guinea. I know Exxon and Santos won't like me saying that, but they spent a bit more money than us, but they acquired 100 and something kilometres. We acquired almost 2,000 square kilometres of data. So I think that ticked the box. We're the most active exploration company. We're going to mature the prospects, obviously work out our drill location. We've already begun talks on drill planning. We'll probably farm down this if there's interested parties. And we're really hoping that we can proceed and drill an exploration well in 2025. And it's encouraging to hear from the department that Total apparently is also looking very much at drilling their well about the same time. So that would be a great thing for us. So just finally, two takeaways from this talk, and as I said at the start, I'm breaking it into two parts. The first part is Papua New Guinea. You've got an established industry here, some great people, many of them in this room at the moment. You've got a great regulatory framework and a really cooperative regulator. You've got an established domestic market now, and you've got a great export market and export routes. I reckon the existing play fairways are relatively unexplored, and you've got, still in the Papuan Basin, 55 TCF of gas in established plays about yet to find. The unexplored play fairways that I'm talking about, and also Brent did as well, are even bigger. Whole unexplored basins, in fact. So it is a country with an amazing amount of potential if we can get the whole fiscal thing right and get more exploration happening. And then the Larus piece, we've got a potentially giant new hydrocarbon system sitting on the doorstep of Port Moresby, multi-billion barrel potential. We've actually taken the initiative and acquired the 3D seismic, and we've got the best quality data I think anybody's ever seen in Papua New Guinea. It's actually extraordinary, the detail we can see on our data. And we're going to use this to de-risk the prospect, and we'll be drilling, we hope. It's not for the faint-hearted. This is a well in 1,800 metres of water. It's a new thing for PNG to be going into deep water frontiers. And our drill program's running cost us about $100 million. So it's not something that the PNG government can easily fund itself. It's a place for us as foreign investors come in and we fund this and hopefully discover something. And then we cut in pig and we share the spoils or the resources with the people of Papua New Guinea, and the government, and of course our investors. But thank you, True, and Merry Christmas to everybody, and just great to see everybody here today. Thank you.